And now to our political panel to take apart the key issues and media interviews of the day. Joining me in our Melbourne studio is Victorian Liberal Party President Michael Kroger, and at the Sky News Centre is Sam Crosby, Chief Executive of the McKell Institute. Welcome, gentlemen.
G'day.
Thanks, Helen.
Now, let's talk possible income tax cuts. We heard that a little bit earlier in the week, but there's also talk about some of the welfare and family payments, Michael Kroger, may be able to be kept by working women as their income increases, presumably when they return to work. How do you view this sort of carrot, I suppose, before the next election of income tax cuts?
Well, as long as they can be paid for, of course, income tax tax cuts are always a good idea, Helen, because of bracket creep. And Joe Hockey was right; you need to incentivise people. So, as long as they can be paid for, and that's the big issue, of course, with the state of the deficit, which is still serious. So, this is the challenge for the government, and it'll be interesting to see, obviously, close to the election, where that's coming from.
Yeah. So I guess
if they can find the money's good on them.
Yeah, they put out the carrots first, but then that will mean either other tax increases or spending to be cut.
Yes, well, that's obviously right, and I think the likelihood is that spending will be cut rather than other tax increases, because the government, where possible, doesn't want to increase taxes. So, it'll look at other opportunities for spending cuts, and that's always difficult. It's always difficult in an environment like this.
All right, let's have a listen to Matthias Cormann on Australian Agenda today about this issue.
We are saying very candidly to the Australian people that our tax system relies too heavily on income taxes. Income taxes in Australia, by international standards, are too high. Well, obviously, if you reduce revenue from one tax source, then you need to make that up, from other sources.
Sam Crosby, what's your view about this?
Look, let's wait and see what the detail is that they announce and where they're going to find the funding for it. So let me talk in generalities. I spent last week at the National Reform Summit in Sydney, and not one serious economic hardhead was talking about cutting personal income tax, not one. There is a structural problem in the budget that started under Howard, got worse under Rudd and Gillard, and has gotten worse again under this government.
But they were talking a lot about the need for tax reform across the board.
Oh, absolutely.
It was a whole lot of things, wasn't it?
Absolutely. And we can have a mature adult discussion and an adult debate about, is it a GST increase? Is it removing concessions? Is it a multinational tax? Whatever the measures are, we can have a serious conversation about that. What no one's talking about is this sort of supply side trickle-down economics of how do we cut, and somehow just make up the spending. No one's talking about this because it's just not right.
Michael Kroger, it didn't seem to take that long before stopping the age of entitlement talk seems to have gone from the Treasurer's vocabulary. Does that worry you?
Well, obviously it does. Let's be frank about this, Helen, and Sam's not quite right there. I mean, spending as a percentage of GDP is probably 1% higher than the historical average. And really, more and more the government needs to, means test all types of government benefits, which was why the pension changes were important, and the Greens in the end supported that. So the government's got to, governments of all persuasions have got to continue to look at situations where those that don't need support from governments don't get it.
Yeah.
And that's what Joe was talking about. I'd like the focus to go back onto that, to means test every benefit where it's not necessary, because we do have people who are disadvantaged and they need help.
Yes, so this talk that we hear today, speculation that the government is possibly going to allow some lower to middle income families keep some family and welfare benefits once the mother returns to work. Does that to you sound like it's not means tested enough, that perhaps too many high income people might be in that group?
Well, look, it's a very interesting proposal, and I'd have to see the details of it, because it's unusual to do what the government's thinking about. But I just say to you that this is a very wealthy country, one of the wealthiest countries in the world, who've been through an extraordinary mining boom, and we're running a $50 billion budget deficit with more than $300 billion worth of debt.
I didn't think I'd ever hear those words from you, Michael Kroger. Only a $50 billion budget deficit.
Yeah, only. So if we're, I'm being facetious, by the way, if we're in that much of a mess, how are the rest going? And so, ultimately governments have to rein in these debts. They can't, these deficits, they can't keep going on forever. There is a pathway to surplus, but it's well down the track. So, you know, this is where the government's got to look at every expenditure. And if people getting concessions who are wealthy, well, obviously they shouldn't be getting those concessions. And quite frankly, that's where I'd start be attacking.
You are saying you're a bit worried about the Treasurer's talk on these issues.
Well, not worried. I'm just, we're just all waiting for more detail to be provided in relation to it because, look, it's a very interesting idea, and obviously he and the government want to get women back into the workforce. It's a strong productivity move, but how it's going to be paid for ultimately is the question that everyone needs to answer.
All right, let's move on because the Australian Border Force had, I guess you could call it, a bit of a stuff-up, Michael Kroger, in your hometown of Melbourne on Friday. They were going to do an operation on the streets of Melbourne in conjunction with the Victoria Police. It suddenly got cancelled because of a wrongly worded press release, apparently. Now, it has escalated. The minister is now saying he didn't even bother reading, or his office didn't bother reading the press release because they thought it was going to be normal behaviour. Does it worry you that the Border Force may have been out there just stopping people as they come across them, I think were the words in the press release?
Yeah, well, you'd like to have a reasonable suspicion before they stop people rather than just a random approaching people in the street. So, I think it's fair to say there was overreach on their behalf. Does it worry me the Minister's office didn't read the press release? No, he probably gets hundreds of these things every day from one source or another, and of course he's not going to read every operational release. But the third point is, all these professional demonstrators who are in the streets in Melbourne on Friday, I just completely dismiss them. They're part of a professional demonstration group in Melbourne. One week they're at a global warming demonstration, then they're complaining about this, then they're complaining about something else. There's a floating group of professional demonstrators in Melbourne. So you don't think it would have been any sort of infringement of civil liberties to randomly check people's papers? Even the Prime Minister said we don't do that in this country. No, I didn't say that in the slightest. I said it was overreach by the department. What I'm saying is that the protesters who came out complaining about racism, etc. You never see these protesters, by the way, defending the members of the Jewish community. When there's anti-Semitism in this country, none of this ratbag left are ever defending the Jewish members of our community, and that's something for which they should be ashamed of themselves, because many of them have racist tendencies when it comes to the Jewish community. All right, let's have a listen to Bill Shorten on this Border Force issue from a press conference yesterday.
What on earth were Mr Abbott and Mr Dutton thinking, saying they're going to have some sort of strike force of uniformed federal public servants accosting like a dragnet in the streets of Melbourne in some sort of quasi-police state where they're just asking people to show their papers?
Sam Crosby, was that hyperbole, as the Minister Julie Bishop said today?
No, look, I think he's dead right. I think a lot of Australians were horribly offended with this. I'll just take Michael up on one of his points about the Minister not reading it. Of course the Minister shouldn't have read this press release. He's right. He gets hundreds of these things every week. Someone in his office should have. I've worked as a political staffer. Someone in his office absolutely missed this, and that shouldn't be excused. Frankly, I think Peter Dutton needs to stand up on this and explain exactly what the process was, simply because if I think it was BuzzFeed that broke this, but if whoever broke this didn't see it, my God, this would have gone ahead. This only got pulled back because the media got hold of it and it built, and, there were the protests and whatnot. But, if it had gone ahead, I think there would be some serious questions that need to be answered. And I don't think it's good enough for Peter Dutton and Tony Abbott to just blame some sort of middling bureaucrat and back out of the whole thing. All right, let's listen to Foreign Minister Julie Bishop on this issue today.
It was a clumsily worded press release. It was never the intention of Border Force to randomly stop people in the street. That's certainly not government policy. And so it was a poorly worded press release.
All right, in our remaining minute, Michael Kroger, I'd just like both your comments on Commissioner Deyson Heydon is to make his decision on whether he should stand down. Should he stay or should he go from the Royal Commission tomorrow?
Well, he should certainly stay, and it would be outrageous if he was forced off the bench. This is, of course, a former justice who was appointed by the Labor Party to the New South Wales Court of Appeal in 2000. No one seems to have mentioned this point in all this toing and froing. This man was appointed by the Carr Labor government to the New South Wales Court of Appeal. So, to say that he's got some association with the Liberal Party, well, the Labor Party thought he was good enough to make a member of the New South Wales Supreme Court.
All right, so you think he should stay?
Oh, of course you should say
All
this
right,
is an
Sam
absolute
Crosby?
scandal.
Michael, to be fair, the Labor Party also appointed John Kerr to Governor-General. It didn't work out too well for us in 75.
Do you think he should
Yeah, but
stay
he
or
was one of
should
yours.
go?
He was one of yours.
Yeah, that's
He
the
was one
point.
of yours.
That's the point, Michael. That's the point. No one's saying that this guy's a out-and-out member of the Liberal Party. What we're saying is that his own test, which is the appearance of bias, which he wrote in 2011 and has stood as the test for judicial conflicts of interest. What we're saying is that he has failed his own test of the appearance of bias.
All right, gentlemen, I'm sorry, we do have to leave it there. Michael Kroger and Sam Crosby, thanks so much for joining me.
Thank you.
And for the